Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in about a minute here, so just hold on tight. It's not quite noon here on the East Coast, so we'll give it about another minute and we'll get going. If you have any problems seeing or hearing me, please let me know now in the questions or in the chat in the control panel. Thank you very much. All right, well, my clock says noon. And it looks like the sound is loud and clear. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services, and I'm here today to talk to you about choosing an automation tool. And we're going to use an example here today, and the example will be using CodedUI and Selenium. But the main topic here is about the process of choosing an automation tool and some concerns or considerations that you may have or should have in making that choice. So I want to get started with a couple things. First of all, tell you who I am, what Beaufort Fairmont is. I focus on test automation. Our company focuses on test automation. We do this for clients all throughout the US, and we're starting to do that with some in Canada as well. We work in all different facets of test automation. We help companies plan strategies through our consultations. We make recommendations through those consultations for helping companies get from point A to point B, putting together a plan for them. We do training. So if you need to know about Selenium, for instance, or CodedUI, if you need to train people in BDD or Cucumber, any of those types of tools, we can help you out with that. We've even got a really nice testing course. It's a 3-day course that we do. And finally, we help folks through dedicated people. So our test automation experts can come out and help you. They usually work remotely. They're based in the United States, and we work basically on the same core hours as our clients do. So love to work with you on those if you're interested. Once again, my name is Paul Merrill. You can find me on Twitter, dpaulmerrill. Write that down, take a picture, copy, paste, whatever you need to do, and follow me on Twitter. I love to talk to folks on Twitter about testing and test automation, and love to see the thoughts that you have about these webinars on there as well. So a couple things that are upcoming. I'll be down at Star East next week, so if you're going to be there, ping me. I would love to meet up for breakfast or lunch, or come see my session, or I want to see your session if you're one of the folks speaking out there. Make sure to hit me up. And if you're in the Orlando area and you've got time next week to grab a cup of coffee, let's do it, because I'll have some time there as well. I'm doing a workshop on the first day of the conference and a talk on the last day of the conference, so it should be fun. The date here on the last one, this May date, is actually wrong. I'll be speaking at TriTog, which is a local meetup here in the Research Triangle, the rainy Research Triangle today, in June. So I look forward to seeing folks there. That's going to be a lot of fun. And the next meetup for TriTalk is actually that date, but that's not one where I'll be speaking, but it'll be a good time anyway. As you guys know, I do a $50 Amazon gift card giveaway during this thing. So stick around to the end of the webinar. You never know, you might win it. So without further ado, I want to get started talking here, but I've got a couple of polls. I'd like to get an idea of you all and what you're currently doing with test automation and with making tools decisions. So I'm going to launch this poll. It says, is your organization currently trying to make a decision on a test automation tool? So for instance, hey, we've got this problem we want to solve. We want to do test automation. There are all these great tools out there. Which one do I choose? How do we make that decision? If you guys are going through that, let me know. It looks like we're getting close to 60% of folks voting, and I usually turn it off around 70 or 80. So we'll see. We're running neck and neck here. It's kind of back and forth between who wins this on the yeses and nos. Are you one of the folks that are making a decision on test automation tools or not, is the question. So with 76% voting, I'm going to close that off. So here are the results. Hopefully you can see those here. And it looks like it's relatively split, 60% saying yes, and some others saying no here. That's interesting. I also want to get an idea of who you all are and what it is you're doing with a couple more questions. So the second question is going to be, do you have a clear process for software development? So we're going to get into this a little bit as we go along. When I'm working with clients, when I'm trying to help them decide on a tool or decide on a plan of action moving forward, a strategy for implementing test automation, one of the most important pieces of that in my mind, and in helping companies and in seeing companies succeed and working with companies to get to success, is do we have a clear understanding of our process for software engineering? So that's what I'm asking you here, and it's going to fit in nicely with this talk. So almost 70% voting here, and I'm going to close down the poll. Get your votes in quickly. All right, you've had your chance. 72% voting, pretty good rate of voting. So the results here, 70% say yes, and 20% say sometimes or some departments. This is probably, I would say this is close to what I see in the real world when I'm working with folks. So I might see a few less yeses with folks. I think that maybe there are some definitions we could help with there. But anyway, 70% saying yes, that's terrific. Let's get rolling with this. So if you're having any trouble seeing the slides, please let me know. If at any point you have questions or thoughts, type them into the questions section. I am going to make sure to stop and ask 4 questions at a certain point, but go ahead and type them in when you have them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I sat down and started thinking about how I make this decision. I think there are processes that we go through that are not necessarily conscious. And for me, the decision-making process for this was not as conscious as I would like. I've got somewhat of a formula around it, but I wanted to clarify that a little bit recently. I noticed this morning I have a Rubik's Cube, and I gave it to my son, and he started mixing it up. And his trick was he was going to mix it up, and then I was going to have to fix it. And he made like 5 or 6 turns on it, and I picked it up, and I fixed those maybe 4 turns. I fixed those 4 turns back to the way that the cube should be. And I thought about it, and I realized I didn't have a conscious understanding of the cube. I didn't know exactly why I made the turns that I made, but I knew that if I made those turns, it would work and it would fit back together in the right colors. We were only about 3 or 4. Now I'm down to 3 turns, right? I've already gone down from, it's a fish story that the fish is getting smaller. Anyway, I made those turns and got it back to the right place, but I wasn't conscious about why I made those decisions. And I think with a lot of these things, we're not always conscious of the steps that we take in the process. So one of the things that I did in walking through this was write down, what steps do I make in this decision-making process? How do I help companies walk through this? And I also went out and did some research on it. And it turns out there are 2 major decision-making formula out there. I don't have the references in these slides, but if you email me, paul@beaufortfairmont.com, I'd be happy to send them to you later. One of them has 7 steps. One of them has 5. I had already written down my steps and how to make these decisions, and they very nicely lined up. In the 5-step approach that I read about, they basically take 2 of the steps and consolidate them in other places in the 5-step, but they're basically doing the same things and the same things that I'm doing here. This is a decision like any other. So first off, we have to know what we're trying to solve. I can't tell you how many times I sit down with folks, they're trying to solve some problem. I say, help me understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. And it's blank stares. And that's okay. That's all right. But I want to get us to a point where we understand what the problem is we're trying to solve. And there are some pretty basic pieces to this. You'll notice some type of pain that you're trying to relieve. You'll notice some type of inefficiency that someone's trying to relieve, or you'll notice personal wants or pressures from within the organization for solving a problem within your company. So I've tried to write that down here. Write down what the problem is. This is step number 1. Whatever the problem is, write it down. Try to get it into a sentence, maybe 2 sentences. What is the problem we're trying to solve using a tool for test automation? And be specific, because the more specific you are, the easier it's going to be to find a solution. Step number 2, Determine the stakeholders. So figure out who's involved, figure out why they're involved, and what impact this decision could have on them. Figure out how they can have an influence into this decision and who those might be. So these could be lots of different people in your organization. Each team is going to be different on who that is. Number 3, identify the priorities. So what are these constraining factors? I call these constraining factors, and I use this in some of my data strategies talks, and I've realized that this abstraction of constraining factors can be used in other places as well. So basically, when you have a decision to make, there are some major factors involved that will constrain how you make that decision. Number 1 is your cost benefit analysis, right? So you're trying to understand, what do I want to put into this? What's my input into this effort? What's my output going to be? What's the ratio of those like, and what are all the factors involved in the cost and the benefit of it? If you've heard me speak very many times, you've probably heard me talk about how I have noticed technical people like us tend to focus very strongly on cost and less so on benefit. And they're both part of the equation. Sometimes I think we get hung up on cost. We get hung up on cost so much that something with a very small cost in relation to the benefit you're going to get out of it will stay in our mind and prevent us from moving forward. Many times the businesses that you're in are willing to spend more money than you know in order to solve a solution because the problem is so big to them. So consider expanding a little bit in terms of cost benefit if you're a technical person, and consider looking at, how do I prefer to look at problems? Do I look at cost a lot? Is cost something that worries me? Are efficiencies the main thing that I think about? Or does effectiveness, efficacy, does that affect me? How does the value out of a decision affect me? Those are keys. So I list here 4 of them. Cost benefit, we talked about a lot. Policy is the idea of, are there internal rules that we have to follow that will change this decision and are a priority for how this decision should work? Are there regulations outside of our company that influence the choices that we make? With an automation tool, it seems like this wouldn't matter, but it does. There are some companies who are regulated in such a way that they have to keep evidence for their testing. And that has to follow certain rules and regulations, like in some cases, FDA 21 FDA Part 11, I believe it is. And I'm writing about that right now. That should come out on the Applitools blog soon. I've been saying soon for a long time, but it's due to come out soon on the Applitools blog about that particular regulation and about how people tend to see it and how they tend to use it, and some of the fallacies that go along with it as well. So policy is key. Infrastructure, I'm not just talking about technology here. Infrastructure, I mean both the technological infrastructure. So what's our stack? What types of tools are we using? What language do we work in? What CI instance do we use? What is our structure and architecture for our application, for our testing, all those types of things, but also organizationally. So organizationally, what are the things that limit or help us with regard to implementing a choice, with regard to making a choice? People like things, people don't like things. They're very important, but likes and dislikes are just as important as some of these other pieces. And I think it's easy to overlook that particular constraining factor. Number 4 step, do your due diligence. This is the discovery period. So this is the idea that I want to go out and look at what tools are available. So with test automation, what I would be doing is, okay, I know what it is I'm trying to accomplish, and we're going to go through a very specific example that's very, very shortly here. But I know a very specific example. I have specific constraints that I want to accomplish. I have certain goals that I want to accomplish, a problem that I'm trying to solve. Now let's go find all the tools that could help me with that, or some of the tools that could help me with that. And then I want to try those out and try to understand exactly what those options mean. One of the things you'll notice in this process, in this 5-step process that I've got here, is you may have to iterate through some of these. So sometimes you don't know that you have a constraint or even a goal or a problem until you see a tool that solves that problem or resolves that constraint or mitigates a certain risk or whatever it is you're trying to do here. So you may go into due diligence, for instance, and realize, oh, there's 3 new tools. And when I look at this one, it takes care of this other problem, which, oh, hey, we have. I want to go back and add that into the problem set that we're trying to solve here. I want to add that into one of the factors that I want and one of the goals that I want to accomplish with this particular tool. So decision making, this is the next part. So make the decision. This is the last step in here. Weigh the factors and decide. One of the things that I noticed recently is sometimes we list out all the factors, the constraining factors involved, and one of them weighs so heavily that it outweighs all the others. And I have an example of that in just a minute here. What's our timeline on making a decision? Go ahead and set one. I want to make a decision by X, Y, and Z. And what happens if no decision is made? So making no decision is making a decision. It's making the decision for status quo. So not making a decision is making a decision in itself. What happens if we make no decision? What are the risks associated with that? What goes along with it? So this is my 5 steps here. These are the 5 steps that I came to. I want to hear your thoughts on these. Have you used these steps in making a decision with automation before? Is there anything new here to you? What comments do you have? Like I said, we're going to go through a very specific example here in just a moment. But the steps, just to go back, start typing them into the questions right now when you have a question, or raise your hand and I'll get to you. State the problem, number 1. Determine the stakeholders, number 2. Identify the priorities or the constraints, number 3. Number 4, do your due diligence. Number 5, make a decision. And I apologize for the background noise here. It sounds like they're working on lawn care outside. So who's got questions? Who has thoughts about this? Let's see. What do you think? Here's a question here. Oh, yes. Okay, so support community. Someone asked, what do you think about the support community and integration capabilities? For instance, is the tool able to integrate with Jenkins? Should they be considered when making a decision? We're going to get into exactly that. So these would be some of your priorities, right? So talking about, first of all, stating the problem, setting your goals. If one of your goals is to do continuous integration, if one of your goals is to be able to view the results of your automated test through the continuous integration tool, then that's a priority for you. That is a part of the problem. That's a goal that you want to deal with. If you've already locked in to one particular framework for that, one particular application, then it's one of your priorities. It's a constraining factor. It's a part of the infrastructure that we list here on the priority slide. So yeah, absolutely. Should they be considered? I think so. It just depends on what's important to you. So we've got several other questions here. Thank you very much for that question. Skill set of the staff. Absolutely. I would consider this as a part of infrastructure. So I know that it may not sound right, but the infrastructure of your organization, what resources do you have available to you? What types of money, what types of people, what skill sets do each of them have involved? Absolutely, that's got to be a factor. And we're going to get into that a little bit with this specific example that I have here. So thank you so much, Bill, for that question. Here's one from Chris, and it's long, and I want to review it first. Quickly. Okay, so our stakeholders are from 2 organizations merging. Existing automation tools exist on completely different code bases and languages. These existing sunk costs conflict with some priority of having as many contributors as possible. How to resolve these conflicts? Sounds like a personal problem, Chris. Existing sunk costs conflict with some priority of having as many contributors as possible. So I'm not sure that I'm getting all of this. It sounds like you have multiple factors here, Chris. I don't necessarily know how to solve specifics in this webinar for your particular case, but I'm happy to kind of talk to the generalities. In general, what I see is you've got to resolve those somehow, right? So I don't really have a problem with using more than one tool within an organization as well. And many times I think you have more than one tool in an organization. I have the example that I've been talking about lately. My dad and I built some shelves in my garage recently, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And while I was at the hardware store getting materials together, I had bought the wood, I bought all the supplies, everything else we needed, and I knew my tool set at home. I knew what I had in the garage ready to go. But I'm walking down the aisle at Home Depot, and I see these nail guns, and they're air pressure nail guns. And all I would need is an air compressor and the hoses and the nail gun and whatever else. But man, for that feeling of just a pop every time you put a nail in there, that'd be really cool. I'd feel really, really great about that. I'd be able to put the plywood on the 2x4s that I wanted to do really quickly and easily. But on the other hand, I didn't need it to complete the job that I had, and I wanted to use screws and to drill those in, and I had a drill at home, and I had all the drill bits and everything else. If I had bought the nail gun and not had any other tools, I would have had a problem, right? I'd have no level, I'd have nothing to saw the wood with, I'd have none of the bracing that I used to hold the shelves up, my dad and I, when we were trying to put them up. So this stud finder for the wall was a big piece of this. A hammer and a nail for some things that aren't so easy with the screwdriver and screws and drill that I had. You know, I look at that a lot like test automation, and I see a lot of folks out there who want to pick one tool for their entire organization. And it just doesn't even make sense. It just doesn't make sense. If you want to do unit testing, you're not going to use Selenium. If you want to do UI testing, you're not going to use JUnit or InUnit or PyTest or whatever else it is. If you want to use BDD, you're going to find a spec tool like RSpec, or you're going to find Cucumber, or you're going to find SpecFlow, or whatever it is. There are different tools for different reasons. And it's the reasons that should guide us towards selecting a tool, not some other scheme. So in your case, you've got multiple factors pressuring you. One is to try to include everyone in building out test automation. So to do that, you've got to look at what are the skills that all the people have there. If you've got people who don't have skills in test automation, you need a tool like a test driver that's going to allow them to create the scripts to do that in a human readable format, or record and playback. And I know a lot of people would, banish me from the test automation community for saying that, but it does have its benefits from time to time. But you would need some type of tool to help you involve those people. And then you've got to get the resources somewhere else to go in and write the code to tie those in to the actual code base. So there are a lot of factors going on in your question there, Chris. I hope I've answered it a little bit. It sounds like you've got a lot of constraints and things. I'm going to answer a couple more of these and then we're going to move on. So we talked about skill set. Someone else asked about that. Open source versus licensed product is a big decision. Absolutely, Bill. I completely agree. This can be easy for companies and it can be very difficult. So there are tools that have licenses. Those licenses can look very, very expensive. When you sit down and think about a few $1,000s per person, and you've got dozens or hundreds of testers that you want to use the product, those numbers can add up very, very quickly. Once again, looking at cost is just one part of the equation. What's the benefit is the other part. There are other pieces of this. What other products do you have with that particular company? Do you want to stay in that chain of products? How does it work with your management? Is there a certain tool that this particular set of managers has used before? Is there a relationship somewhere that makes us want to select one tool rather than the other? Nearly all of the licensed tools, and I say nearly all the licensed tools are going to try to feed you the idea that with this piece of automation, this tool, automation is going to be easy. That you buy this product and boom, automation comes and it's just magic and everyone's happy and no one ever has to do any work anymore. That's just not the case. I've never seen it happen. What usually happens is that we find out 2 years later what the impact is, and the people who made those decisions are no longer around, or they don't want to fess up to having made them, or we're not willing to go in a different direction, even though we know that there have been impacts and problems. This isn't the case with all paid tools, but with a lot of them, it is. Many of the tools that are open source tend to be less salesy. They tend to they're not necessarily saying, hey, this will fix all of your problems. We wrote a tool, we made it free. If you use it properly and you put the proper effort into it and learn around this particular space of test automation and get that experience and that expertise, then you can create a really great test automation framework, tool, testing out of it. So I'll leave that there. Thank you so much for the question, Bill, and please let me know if I don't answer these well. So let's move forward. I want to do a couple other things here. Yeah, okay. So keep asking the questions as we go along. I will break again here in a few minutes for more. So I got a lot of comments when the webinar came out, and it said, learn how to make a choice about test automation, CodedUI versus Selenium. I want to be really clear. I want to talk about the process of making the decision. I'm not here to talk about whether one tool is better than the other. I'm here, one tool will be better than another in a given context for a given set of people at a given time for certain reasons. There are lots of pieces to a context. I had two clients recently who wanted to make this decision. One had used CodedUI a lot, one had used CodedUI none, but they both already had the licenses. So this is another part when we talk about paid licenses. What if you're already paying for the license? Sometimes you feel like you need to use it because you paid for the license, right? With CodedUI, it comes as a part of the Visual Studio family of products from Microsoft. And I believe it's at the enterprise level. So you paid a lot of money, most likely, for each of those licenses. And now you're interested in using as much as you can out of that and getting as much as you can for that. So it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. Let's try CodedUI first. And I had never worked with CodedUI. I still haven't gotten deep into CodedUI. I've used Selenium WebDriver a lot, and I've used it with multiple different languages in multiple different environments and all those. So I'm helping these teams make this decision. Number one, it's not my decision to make as a consultant. It's not. It's their decision. I can make a recommendation based on the factors that I know, but I can't know all the factors involved in an organization. I can't know that in a 1 hour free consultation that I do for anybody that wants to do them. I can't do it in a 5-day, 10-day initial consultation, which we do multiple times a year with different companies. And those are getting to be more limited because there's so much demand for them. But we can't necessarily get in and understand exactly what your company needs. You all are the experts within your company about your company and about what it needs. So you have to make the decisions and you have to move forward with it. What I can do is say, in my experience, I have seen, and my experience and the experience of my folks is pretty vast. We have seen many, many, many frameworks fail and succeed. We can help you keep from failing and succeeding, or keep from failing, hopefully getting to success with a particular framework if you go by our guidance and use our recommendations. So in this case, I said, hey, look, in both of them, I'm not going to make the decision for you, but what I can do is find out more about them. And I'm not going to come in and say use Selenium just because I haven't used CodedUI and just because I have suspicions about it. I'm not going to do that. So I went out and researched CodedUI, and I went back and did more research, even though I feel very comfortable with WebDriver Selenium. And what I attempted to do in my time to help these folks out was make a case for CodedUI, make a case for Selenium WebDriver, make a case against CodedUI, and make a case against Selenium WebDriver. And that's how I come to a lot of good conclusions and a lot of good research. And then sometimes there's the what other options exist. In the case of these two particular clients, these were the two options they each wanted to circle around. I had folks before this webinar come to me and say, hey, Paul, why don't you just throw Cypress in there? Why don't you throw Protractor? You should really think about RainerX. You should really think about blah, blah, blah in this webinar. And I don't have I'm not able to do that at this time. I just wanted to use a couple of these examples. There are a lot of great tools out there for what you might be doing. But once again, we want to state the problem. We want to talk about this in terms of the process of making this decision, not necessarily in specifics of these two tools, but you're going to get that for free anyway today. So if you're making that very same decision, you're in luck. So we started out with the problem, state the problem. So these companies wanted to do web UI testing. They wanted to learn more about the SUT and learn it more quickly. So SUT is system under test. They wanted less human interaction for the mechanics of testing, the pressing of the buttons and the driving of the mouse and those types of things. So they stated their problem. This is one hypothetical case. I'm not using the case from a specific client. This is a very similar hypothetical here. So who needs to be involved? Well, in the case of this hypothetical, the automation engineers needed to be involved. They were the ones that were going to be writing this all the time, so they needed to be involved. The VP of engineering, this is the person who was footing the bill. She wanted to be involved because she's the one who has to sign off on it. It's her skin in the game. We need to make sure that she is happy with the decision we make and behind it 100%. Otherwise, things aren't going to work. The director of QA needed to be involved. These are the other folks as well. Testers who might want to get into test automation or who may be affected by it, and developers who may also be affected by it. I have friends in the test automation industry who will tell you whatever language you're using in the development group is the language that you should use for your test automation. And that's just that. That's just the solution. And then you should just use Selenium, or you should just use this, or just use that. I just don't think it's that simple. I've seen too many cases where it's not that simple and too many exceptions to go along with that. Now, is there a benefit in keeping the languages similar? Absolutely. And that's why in this case, we have developers on here. So we know in advance, we want to be able to go back and leverage developers. If we choose the same programming language between the tool and what the developers use on a day-to-day basis, it's easier to get their help. So that is one of their factors here. And we see that here in the priorities or constraints. A common language, C#, a web UI that they want to test. We want to make sure that maintenance is low and that we have support now and in the future. So we also have discovery, or the due diligence period. So we went in and started looking at these two tools, trying to drive them and understand exactly how they worked and what they were for. The purpose of a tool is very important as well. Let's not try to use Selenium for API testing. That doesn't make any sense, right? Let's not try to use Rest Assured for UI testing. That doesn't make any sense. It's for APIs, Selenium and WebDriver for UIs. Those are two completely different things. So use a tool for what it's intended for. So what's our experience with CodedUI and Selenium? And they wanted to make sure to have expertise in CodedUI and Selenium. And what we found in this hypothetical case, and what we found with both of my clients, was that the support for the tool was the overarching most important factor. It was the most important priority. So, but we didn't know that to begin with. The reason that we knew it was because in my research, I had started hearing about support for CodedUI. And in working with each of these two clients, both of my two consultants on this came back to me and they're like, I'm a little worried. It doesn't look like they're fully supporting this. I don't see a lot of updates on the status of CodedUI. Recently, I don't see a lot of activity around it. I don't see a new path in terms of product mapping and product roadmap that they've got coming forward. They were just not seeing a lot of future there. So I went out and researched and I found this statement on MSDN from Microsoft. And I'll give you a minute to read it. But the part that really got me was midway through, where we say, as such, our investments in CodedUI will be selective and limited to supporting customers on any issues they encounter. We will be improving our support and authoring for running WebDriver-based Selenium and Appium tests. So if that doesn't knock you on the ground and say, wait a minute, CodedUI, there might be a problem here, then I don't know what does. Let me help you parse this if you're not catching the drift here. There's a lot of hedging in this first sentence, or the first sentence that I read. Our investments in CodedUI will be selective, so they're hedging on that word, and limited. So they're not going to do any work that's new with CodedUI. They're going to limit it to supporting customers. And what happens when we limit a product to supporting customers? That just becomes a cost center and someone wants to cut it out. So this will be end of life at some point. The only reason that they would do this is because they realize there's not a future in it. They've lost this game to Selenium. They don't want to fight it anymore. And they're actually moving people over to Selenium. So that last sentence, will be improving our support for authoring and running WebDriver-based Selenium and Appium tests. That's huge. That means, I mean, to pick an open source tool over the one that you created at your company, and then to support it more so than the other, it was breathtaking to see that. So this really made the case against CodedUI and made it so that by default Selenium was going to win with each of these two clients. And when I look into this, and I put this together, something like this together for one of the clients, this is an example. This was kind of a matrix for the constraints that we had involved here. And you'll notice some things right away. So support for browser execution with CodedUI was only IE. You had to use the Selenium WebDriver library, some type of adapter to drive any other browser, which why would you use that adapter if you're not going to use the product to begin with? Support for grid, it just wasn't there in CodedUI. It's there with plenty of tools in Selenium. On and on and on. There were just a lot of these things that weighed heavily in Selenium's favor and against CodedUI. The future was a big part of this. So someone asked, what about the community surrounding things? In this case, yeah, they were very interested in the community surrounding these tools. And when you look out and you see the lack of momentum, the lack of answers, the lack of questions even about CodedUI on some of the popular knowledge bases out there like Stack Overflow and others, and even MSDN, when you see the lack of interaction on those questions over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, you realize, hey, this may not be where we want to go. Sometimes that can be helpful. Sometimes you're at the bleeding edge and you've got a tool that you want to use that nobody else is using. I would imagine the community around Cypress and Protractor is smaller than that of Selenium right now. It doesn't mean they're worse products. It just means that the community hasn't come along with that yet. The other thing is you look at the support with Selenium. We've got native drivers within these languages, many of them C#, Java, many of the biggest JavaScript, many of the biggest languages that are out there. It's therefore, when you start looking at Protractor and Cypress, those are JavaScript based tools. So you're going to have less people that are involved in that right from the get-go, but you never know how that may change over time. So, and that's not to say anything bad about any other tool, but I wanted to bring a little bit of those other tools into the argument. You also get a lot of great things out of some of those other tools. Like for instance, with Protractor, you're able to handle a lot of the async stuff more easily, the single page application responsive design type things that we all do these days much more quickly and much more easily. You can also notice that Protractor was written specifically for Angular. So if you've got an Angular face on your project, an Angular front end, that could be a really, really good choice. So there's some really nice bonuses to those. So based on the factors we listed, Selenium was the clear choice for this hypothetical case. It was also the clear choice for the 2 clients that I mentioned. So I want to go back and get some of your questions and concerns. I have a couple more poll questions while you're doing that. I'm going to go ahead and ask this one. Do you have a clear plan for test automation? You guys be thinking of your questions and comments about this decision-making process. I always like to learn where people are at and where the folks that come to these webinars are at. I like you guys a lot. I like learning about you. I like seeing where people progress. Sometimes the answers to these 12 months after I asked them before, they can change. And you can see that happening within companies. Is kind of neat. So, so yeah, it looks like we're at about 63% here voting. So I'm going to close this down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and close. Okay, so let me share these results. So do you have a clear plan for test automation? It's 32% to 30, and then the lion's share, the biggest piece of the pie, is 40%. Some teams more than others, and I think that tends to be the case. One team is going to have certain concerns around test automation. They're going to have certain skill set. They're going to have certain resources at play. They're going to have certain people that are interested or not interested, or able or not able to participate. They're going to have combinations of people that are going to be more helpful than others in making a plan work. So having a plan together is about the leadership of those teams. Does your leadership come together and put a plan together? Do they go find someone who can help them see around the corners and not make the mistakes that others have made? So it's perfectly reasonable to me to see these responses. I would imagine for some folks it's very surprising though. So I'm going to hide that. Look, what are your comments? What are your questions? I'm going to make sure to look for people with their hands raised here too. I didn't do that last time. So let me just see if anybody's got a hand raised that wants to get on the phone here and ask some questions. Okay. All right, we're getting some questions in here. It takes a little bit of time for people to type these. Which is the best language to use for the Selenium framework? Can you please compare C# and Ruby? I don't think there is a best language to use just in general for anything. I think that each language, just like each tool, has its own pluses and minuses. I appreciate the question there, Gamzee, but I just don't do what's the best language. That's just not a question that I know how to answer. Maybe there are other people that can answer it. I can say this, that I get a lot of feedback from people about what has worked for them. And one of the things that I hear a lot in terms of programming languages for new programmers, I hear things like Ruby was easier to learn. I hear things like JavaScript was easier to learn than Java and C#. I think I know why that is. I think it has to do with being a loosely typed language, each one of those being loosely typed. I think that the objects and primitives and the boilerplate code with C#, with Java, with some of these others is a little bit cumbersome for people at first, but I don't have the same experience as them. I learned C, C++, Java, JavaScript, C#, Python. I learned a lot of these different languages over time, Objective-C, and they all have their pluses and minuses. I don't know how to tell you what's the best language to use, but hopefully you can use the same decision-making process here to help make that decision for yourself. So thank you, Gamzee, for your question there. So what's your opinion on keyword-based tests versus reusable actions and page object model UI tests? I don't see these as being opposites or in opposition in any way. You can use keyword-based tests along with reusable actions and with page models in UI tests. I don't see any need to talk about why we would argue one over the other because they're kind of non-orthogonal or whatever. Sebastian, thanks for that question. I guess, and it may be that people's experience with some of these things makes them think that that one of these might conflict with the other or contrast with the other, but each of these tools in and of themselves don't necessarily conflict. So a page object model is just one pattern. It can be implemented a lot of different ways. Reusable actions, I hope you have reusable actions. Some people, you put those inside their page object model. Some people put them into actions. Some people put them in other places. Keywords can call into those actions and use the page object model to access things on a screen for UI. So my opinion on those types of things is that whatever model helps you make it through the day is a good thing. I think that a model is good until it's not good anymore, and that the page object model is just one design pattern. It pains me to hear so much about the page object model and nothing about other design patterns. So if you've gone far enough to understand that one design pattern, start learning others. One that may be of help, for instance, is the factory pattern from the design patterns book that came out many, many years ago. But the factory pattern can be very helpful in doing things like selecting the right driver to come up for the right browser. And you'll find yourself, you've probably already implemented that pattern if you built a couple frameworks. So there are lots and lots of different design patterns out there. Go learn some more of them. In terms of keyword-based tests, keyword-based testing can be great. Once again, each of these tools, each of these paradigms, each of these patterns has its place and time and function. So that would be my opinion on that. I hope that that answers your question. Is the same approach used for test management and performance testing tools? This is from Bill. So you could certainly use the same approach, this 5-step process for deciding on just about anything. And once again, I will be happy to get you the references that I used for decision-making process. I forgot to put them into the slides, and send me a note, Paul at beaufortfairmont.com, and I'd be happy to send you those, Bill. So yes, the decision-making process can be very much the same for other tools as well. I talked a little bit about the process that we plug a tool into, and I think that's so important. And I asked you all, hey, what process, do you have a clearly defined software development process? Do you have a plan in place for test automation? I really believe that when you have a strong process in place and you find a tool to fit with that process, you're going to be more successful than if you use a tool to try to implement a process, okay? So I'll give you an example. Lots of places I go and I talk to clients and I say, hey, tell me about your software development process. And they say, we're agile, we've got Jira, right? We're agile, we've got Jira. Or we're continuous delivery, we've got Jenkins. The things aren't related, right? Like you can go get Jira. It doesn't make you any more agile than you were before, depending on how you use it. Now, if you implement the processes and the steps and know the whys and the principles behind why certain agile methodologies work and certain processes don't work as well in certain situations, then you can apply the right tool to what works. But the other way around isn't usually that helpful. So the same kind of thing there. That's why I was getting to the process part. All unit test frameworks support parallel test execution with Selenium. I guess we're saying, do they all support parallel test execution with Selenium? No, I'm sure some unit test frameworks do not support parallel test execution with Selenium. I don't know about all the unit test frameworks out there. I know quite a number of them. Many of them do have some type of ability to do parallel test execution. There are many ways to run Selenium. Using a unit test framework is one way of doing that. And then there are also many different libraries, and depending on the language, the test runner and the assertion library and the other tools may be different. They may work together, they may not. One piece of them may support parallel execution and one may not. One of the things I see a lot is folks will get into Cucumber, especially in Java. So the Cucumber JVM tool, I guess is what it's called. And there are some things about that make it so that it's very difficult to, or more difficult to run tests in parallel. The thing that most people come down to when running tests in parallel is either your test runner. So a lot of people will go out and use testng or something like it for a test runner, or, and this is much more common, they'll try to run tests in parallel and they'll see flaky tests. So they'll see tests that pass sometimes and don't pass others, and they won't know why. And when it comes right down to it, the main reason that that happens is because you have some resource that these tests are acting on, and test A gets to modifying it before test B, or we've made some assumption about A, B, C need to go in that order in accessing this resource. And so when you try to run those in parallel and test C actually gets to that resource and changes it before A, then we fail on both tests or something along those lines. So that the data, that resource is usually the data that we're using in those databases or some type of data source. It could be any third-party resource though. Those are the things that tend to prevent running in parallel. So this is one of those places where I like to talk a lot about trying to run in parallel from the very beginning. So if you're running test cases in parallel from the very beginning, in order to be successful, you have to solve all the problems related to running in parallel. If you write 300 test cases and then go try to run them in parallel, you've got 300 test cases worth of reasons that they won't run in parallel. So do these things early and think about them early. Really great question, Masa. And I'm not going to be able to get through all these questions, I don't think, but I'll answer a couple more. And I definitely want to make sure to get to the handout, the giveaway, the Amazon giveaway. So make sure to hang on for that. So let's see. Stephen asked the name of the pattern in the book I was just talking about. So the book I was just talking about is by a group called the Gang of Four. And Eric Gamma was one of the authors. There were 3 other well-known authors. I just can't get them into my head right at this moment. But it's a well-known book called Design Patterns. And I've actually got a copy. I've got a copy in a book box over there, but I'm not going to run and grab it right now. But if you look up Gang of Four Design Patterns, you'll find it. It's the original one from 1997 or 8 or something along those lines. It was originally written in C. And so if you, and there are other versions of it out there in different languages, but that's great to ask. Yeah, so the factory pattern was one of those. There are many other design patterns out there as well. Okay, let's see. So this is a really, it's a long one that says, they even say it's not really a question. So let me read through a couple more of these and then we're going to get into this giveaway. Do you think CodedUI is better than Selenium WebDriver? CodedUI will execute the test. This is from Naya. CodedUI will execute the test without displaying the execution on your screen, while Selenium displays the execution on your screen. That's wrong. So it depends on the driver. For Selenium WebDriver, there's a Ghost driver. There are a couple other drivers that have no display. So both of those will do that if you're telling me that CodedUI will do a headless browser as well. So on your screen, while Selenium displays the execution, the test will be affected if you touch the mouse or keyboard. Yeah, so once again, you can use a headless driver with Selenium as well. Which one is better? Like I said, I can't tell you which one's better. They're not innately better than the other. One has its uses, the other has its uses. There are plus and minuses to each. And my hope in talking through some of these webinars is to get you guys thinking about the constraints and the concerns and the context in which you're making a choice, rather than just straight up, is this better than that? Is A better than C? It's like saying, are potatoes better than carrots? Well, if you need a lot of starches, I would go with the potato. If you need a lot of beta carotene, I would go with the carrots, right? So there's a context for these things. And I think that's all I've got for right now. So let's move on to the next part of this. Who's going to win? So let me see if we can hear it. Drum roll. All right. And the winner is Peter E. Peter E. So there was one Peter E. on here, and Peter, if your last name starts with an E, you are the person. If I don't get in touch with you in the next 24 hours for the $50 Amazon gift card, please make sure to ping me and I will get it to you as soon as possible. But you have won. I love that you guys have joined me for this long. Oh, there's that rim shot again, or the drum roll. I want to talk with you about your automation. I want to talk with you about your challenges and figure out how we can help. I talked to you about a few different ways that Beaufort Fairmont helps people. The first and foremost is a free consultation, completely free. We spend an hour together, get on Meetup or GoToMeet, and we can talk through what's going on with your team. We have a lot of other offerings. Office hours is one of them. So once a week, we spend an hour together. This is a paid offering, office hours. Once a week, we get together for an hour and we talk about your team's problems. And I can vary that if you want. An initial consultation is kind of like the next step up when we want to spend a week or two together, walking through what your team is doing, what your organization is doing, and planning the test automation strategy so that you don't have to bump your head against the wall every time you walk near it, so that we can show you where the door is, so that we can help you walk through it and help you walk through all the way to your goals. That's where those consultations come in. And then once again, we have people available to help out with test automation on long-term contracts. When we finish here, after you close out GoToWebinar, you're going to get a survey and it's going to ask you some questions. Fill it out if you like, don't fill it out if you don't like, but I'd love to have your information there to learn more about you. It's going to ask you, do you want that free consultation? And you can say yes there. Give me some information about you and we can set that up. So really appreciate all your time today, your effort. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday afternoon. Hopefully your Wednesday is not as dreary and rainy as mine is, but I've enjoyed spending this time with you. If you want the references I mentioned, there's my email address, paul@beaufortfairmont.com. And I look forward to seeing you next month with another great webinar. Thank you so much for your time and have a good day.